Section 1. The voice you silenced. You felt it. That aching pause between what you wanted to say and what you actually said. That moment you smiled not because you were happy, but because you were afraid not to. You've lived entire chapters of your life this way. Performing. Suppressing. Betraying the voice that once spoke without fear. And yet you still wonder why you feel hollow. Why the praise doesn't land. Why your boundaries collapse like paper walls. Here's the truth, you abandoned yourself to survive. But survival isn't the same as living. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, understood this with chilling clarity. His life's work explored what happens when you sever ties with your authentic self. Jung introduced the concept of the persona, the mask you wear, to meet the world's expectations. It's who you think you have to be loved, accepted, and safe. But here's what Jung warned. The persona is a system of behavior that is in part dictated by society. It is a compromise between individual and society as to what a man should appear to be. When you live behind that mask for too long, you forget what your face even looked like. You begin to trade honesty for harmony, desire for duty, truth for tolerance, and slowly, invisibly, you begin to disappear from your own life. You tell yourself, I'm just being flexible, I'm being mature, I don't want to make a scene. But if you could listen to the voice you buried, it would whisper the words you never say. I'm tired of hiding, I don't feel safe here, I want something more than this. Self-betrayal doesn't scream. It sighs. It rationalizes, it shrinks, and in a world that rewards politeness over truth, stillness over anger, accommodation over authenticity, abandoning yourself isn't just easy. It's encouraged. But make no mistake, the cost is your vitality. The consequence is a life that's full but never fulfilling. So the question becomes, where did it begin? At what point did the world convince you that your silence was more lovable than your voice? Let's go back. Section 2, where self-betrayal begins. You weren't born ashamed of your truth. You learned to be. The moment you realized love had conditions, that's where it started. When you cried too loud, and they told you to quiet down. When you said what you really thought, and they laughed or punished you. When your joy was too much, or your anger was too intense. Little by little, you got the message. I have to be less of me, to be more loved by them. That's where self-betrayal begins, not as a choice, but as a survival strategy. Carl Jung believed this internal division was at the core of psychological suffering. He said, in each of us, there is another whom we do not know. That other is the self you silenced, the one who felt too unsafe, too messy, too strange to let the world see. You didn't kill that part of you. You buried it and called it maturity. You became your own jailer, locking away your curiosity, your defiance, your vulnerability. In their place, you built a persona, a mask made of smiles, a script made of silence. Jung defined the persona as a social mask, the false identity you wear to protect your true self. But he warned, the man who identifies with the persona is in grave danger. He becomes a conformist and a tool of the social machine. What Jung meant is this: if you believe the mask is you, then you no longer know who you really are. You betray yourself by becoming what they'll accept. But Jung wasn't the only one who saw this danger. Friedrich Nietzsche, a century earlier, warned about the cost of becoming socially acceptable. He said, every deep thinker is more afraid of being understood than of being misunderstood. Because to be truly understood is to be vulnerable. And to be vulnerable in a world obsessed with strength and certainty is terrifying. Nietzsche called for a will to power, not over others, but over yourself, over your fears, your inherited beliefs, your self-deceptions. He believed that most people lived as herd animals, clinging to morality, tradition, and appearances just to feel safe. To break free from this herd was not just difficult, it was lonely. But that loneliness, he said, is the path to self-mastery. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often and sometimes frightened, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. That's what self-betrayal takes from you, ownership of yourself. And still, it's seductive. Why? Because it works. You got the praise. You got the smile. You avoided the punishment. You survived. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, said that we are condemned to be free. What he meant was, we always have a choice, and that choice is terrifying. So what do? We lie to ourselves. We pretend we're not free. We say, I had no choice. We say, it's just the way I am. We say, this is what good people do. But Sartre called this bad faith, living as if you are not responsible for your own choices, living as if the role is more real than the actor. So when you say yes to something that violates your values, and you tell yourself, well, that's just life, you're not being realistic, you're being dishonest. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, took this one step deeper. He believed that we push our uncomfortable truths into the unconscious. We repress what we're not allowed to feel: rage, lust, pride, envy. But repression doesn't make it disappear, it makes it stronger. Freud warned, unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. And haven't you felt that? The resentment that bubbles up in a conversation you pretended to enjoy. The bitterness toward a partner you've never actually been honest with. The self-loathing that surfaces after yet another moment of staying silent. These are not accidents. They are symptoms of self-betrayal. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay when you should leave. You nod, laugh, apologize when what you really feel is grief, rage, or disgust. And you wonder why you feel numb, why your life looks full but feels empty. Because you left your truth behind. You traded it for safety, and safety is not the same as peace. Ask yourself, who taught you that being liked was more important than being real? Who made you believe that your needs were dangerous? At what age did you start performing instead of living? You see, the betrayal didn't start last week. It started the moment you were told, don't cry, be good, don't make a scene. So you split in two, the self who feels and the self who's allowed to be seen. But here's the tragedy. You got so good at pretending you forgot it was a performance. You called it responsibility. You called it emotional intelligence. You even called it kindness. But if your kindness demands the murder of your own needs, that's not kindness. That's erasure. If your boundaries only exist when they're convenient, that's not maturity. That's fear in disguise. If your love is based on abandoning yourself to be loved, that's not love. That's self-neglect wearing a smile. So what now? You reclaim what you've exiled. You begin the work of remembering what you betrayed, and that starts by telling the truth, not to others, but to yourself. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. You keep calling it life, but it's not life. It's a series of choices you made while dissociated from who you really are. So no, you're not broken. You're buried, and you're still alive beneath all that pretending. It's time to remember where you began. Section 3. The hidden cost of pleasing the world. You think your self-betrayal protects people, that it keeps the peace, that it makes you a better friend, lover, employee, citizen. But here's the brutal truth. You're not protecting others, you're pacifying them. And in doing so, you are. abandoning yourself. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why? Because self-acceptance is threatening not only to you, but to the world that profits from your silence. When you stop betraying yourself, you stop being easy to control. But let's be honest, what has all your self-betrayal really bought you? All the yeshis you forced out while screaming inside, did they make you feel more loved? All the smiles you wore when your soul was aching, did they bring you peace? Or did they just delay the moment you had to admit you were disappearing? You think saying nothing is neutral, that it keeps things smooth. But in truth, it creates internal erosion, the slow disintegration of who you are. Jung warned about this when he introduced the concept of the shadow, all the parts of you repress, because they don't fit the persona you show the world. To become conscious of the shadow involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. In other words, everything you hide still exists. It doesn't vanish. It festers. And the longer you ignore it, the more power it gains. That's why you explode after one passive-aggressive text. That's why you shut down when someone praises you, because deep down, you know it's the mask they're praising, not you. That's why you feel invisible in rooms you help hold together. Because part of you is invisible. You've made it so. Self-betrayal trains people how to treat you. If you never say no, don't be surprised when they never assume you want to. If you never voice your needs, don't expect anyone to meet them. If you constantly shrink, they'll build their lives around your smallness, and eventually they'll resent you too. Because no one trusts a mask forever. This is the hidden cost. You abandon yourself, and it still isn't enough. They leave anyway. They criticize you anyway. They forget your needs anyway. And now you're not just hurt, you're empty, because you gave everything and kept nothing for yourself. Here's what Freud understood. The repression of your real emotions doesn't just cause neurosis. It causes a breakdown of meaning. He wrote, "Being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. But honesty requires pain. And pain is the one thing a self-betrayer cannot bear to show. So instead you avoid the pain and lose your power. You cope with food, phones, scrolling, sugar, shopping, sex, not because you're addicted, but because you're starved for yourself. Ask yourself, why does being alone feel so uncomfortable? Why do you need to keep checking if they're still happy with you? Why does silence feel like punishment? Because you've lost your internal compass. You've replaced it with external mirrors, and now you don't know who you are unless someone reflects it back. This is not wholeness. This is dependence disguised as devotion. Nietzsche called it slave morality, when your values come from others, not from your own will. When your virtue is just obedience. When you're good not because you're powerful, but because you're afraid. He wrote, "In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule." And what is more insane than a culture that rewards self-erasure? That calls burnout success. That calls perfectionism discipline. That calls your quiet suffering strength. But if you continue down this road, here's where it leads. A career that consumes you. Relationships where you feel needed but never known. A body that aches from the tension of unsaid truths. A spirit that becomes so numb you confuse it for peace. You don't become your best self by pleasing the world. You become a stranger to yourself. And here's the ultimate cost. When you live your life performing, you never feel truly loved. Because how could you? They don't love you. They love the version of you you created to be acceptable. So every compliment feels hollow. Every relationship feels fragile. Every success feels like fraud. Because deep down, none of it was built on truth. You keep giving the world the version of you it likes, But that version can't save you. It can't protect your soul. It can't carry you through loneliness or loss or silence. Only the real you can do that. So stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I owe to myself? You don't need to burn everything down. You need to stop abandoning yourself in the name of being good. You were never meant to be agreeable. You were meant to be whole. Section 4. How you justify abandonment. You've told yourself it's not betrayal. You've called it compassion, patience, being the bigger person. But let's be honest again. You've mistaken your fear for virtue. You don't speak up because you don't want to hurt anyone. But the truth is, you're afraid of what might happen if you finally tell the truth. You're not avoiding conflict. You're avoiding rejection. Carl Jung warned about this moral disguise. He said, "The shadow is the seat of creativity and vitality. What you suppress in the name of being nice. Your boundaries, your anger, your desire. Those aren't your flaws. They're your fire. And when you extinguish that fire, just to stay liked, you don't become a better person. You become a colder one. You say, I don't want to be selfish. I don't want to make waves. I don't want them to feel bad." But here's the question you never ask. What happens to you when you keep doing this? What happens when you are constantly the one who bends, who over-explains, who apologizes for simply existing with needs? You collapse into guilt not because you did something wrong, but because you did something real. Jung said that the path to wholeness isn't found in perfection, it's found in integration. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You think your people-pleasing is light. But what if it's your darkness? What if you're manipulating others with your silence, your passivity, your approval, not out of love, but out of the fear of being left behind? Here's the truth. You don't betray yourself because you're evil. You do it because you're terrified. You fear what would happen if you stood your ground, if you said no without apologizing, if you stopped performing for approval. Because if you did that, you'd finally have to face the truth. Some people wouldn't choose you. And that's the heartbreak you've been trying to avoid your whole life. Søren Kierkegaard, the 19th century existentialist, wrote about the despair of not becoming oneself. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. And he was right. You can build a whole life around what others expect, and still wake up one morning and feel nothing but dread. Because deep down, you know, this life is not yours. You think self-betrayal makes you lovable, but it makes you resentful. You give more than you want to, then rage quietly when it's not appreciated. You perform closeness, but secretly ache for intimacy. You say, it's fine, while your heart screams, this isn't what I want. You can't keep betraying yourself and blaming them for not noticing. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this a bad faith life, one lived as if you're powerless. You say, I have to do this. I don't have a choice. It's just who I am. But all of that is a lie. You are choosing. You are always choosing. The question is, are you choosing from fear or from truth? If you keep living like this, let's be honest, you will become hollow, nice, pleasant, agreeable, and emotionally dead. Because betrayal numbs everything. Not just the pain, but the joy too. You can't selectively mute your truth. When you mute one part of yourself, you silence them all. Section 5. Reclaiming the self you abandoned. So what's the alternative? You stop explaining. You start expressing. You stop collapsing. You start containing. You stop calling your fear maturity. And start naming it for what it is, the instinct to survive at the cost of your soul. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. He wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. Healing is painful. Telling the truth is painful. Letting go of approval is painful, but you're already in pain. The only difference is this pain leads somewhere. So now, ask yourself, what mask have you mistaken for your face? What truth do you keep watering down? Who are you trying to protect, and is it worth the cost of losing yourself? Stop pretending you're fine. You're not fine. You're fragmented. But that fragmentation can be reversed. You can come back. All it takes is one decision: to be loyal to your truth instead of your performance. That's not selfish. That's sacred.